The married two-parent family is going extinct in Black America. 70% of Black children are born to unmarried parents. 45% live with a single mom. Only about 35% of Black adults are married. They deceive women into believing that femininity was weak, that masculinity was toxic in men and empowering in women, that marriage is oppressive, that the home is a prison, and that children are a burden.
We are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews and David Mahan, joined now by Delano Squires, who's the director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing, where he focuses on policies and social norms that promote marriage, fatherhood, and healthy families. Delano is the author of a new book, The Vanishing Black Family, How Welfare and Feminism Made Marriage Optional and Children Vulnerable. And we are talking with him about that book today. Even though last time we talked, Delano, I said we were going to do a podcast about the 90s Cleveland Indians teams. We want to focus on the book today, and we're glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Well, tell us about the book. I know we're kind of in this little bit of a bubble where these are things that we talk about because of our policy work, but obviously there is a need to have this conversation more broadly. So now that the book is published and out there, what kind of reception have you seen, and how is it, or how are you hoping that it advances this needed conversation?
It's been a good reception so far. I've been intentional about some of the outlets I've reached out to, and been able to talk to some Christians who are solidly in our camp, right? I've talked to some other people who may say, oh, I agree with some of the issues, but I may come at it a different way. I've talked to some people who are firmly on the political left who may disagree on the specific importance of marriage as an institution, but generally agree that children do better when raised with both a mom and a dad under the same roof. So it's been good. It's been a good reception. I've been pleased with it, but I want to do more. In terms of what I want the book to accomplish, I'll say it this way, and particularly for people who are in the policy and social science realm, I want this book to do for family revival and revolution what Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, did for conversations around criminal justice reform and mass decarceration. Now, I didn't agree with many of her premises or her conclusions, but her book really was like intellectual kindling that sparked a movement. And I want this book to do the same when it comes to family revival and revolution, generally speaking, and specifically with respect to the Black family.
So what specifically is the issue at hand, and why is it so necessary that we have a movement sparked to solve it?
I mean, the issue quite simply is this. The married two-parent family, whether you call it nuclear, natural, or biblical, is going extinct in Black America. So today, 70% of Black children are born to unmarried parents. 45% live with a single mom. Only about 35% of Black adults are married. So the marriage culture and family structure that were the norm in Black America from the end of the Civil War through the end of the Civil Rights Movement is now the exception, which means that if you meet or have a Black child who's raised by his or her married mom and dad under the same roof for 18 years, the first 18 years of his or her life, again, that person is the exception and no longer the norm. So what I want to do is to spark the conversations needed to address this particular issue. I'm coming at the book. It's not, Lifeway wouldn't necessarily have published this book, but I'm a Christian speaking to an important cultural issue in the public square, and I'm addressing it from a biblical perspective. But this is something that needs national prominence. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book in the way that I did is because I acknowledge, honestly, right, how we got here, and also acknowledge the fact that the left of center, progressive, civil rights organizations, racial justice activists and advocates demand racial equity in every institution aside from the institution of marriage and every structure outside of family structure. So this book is part, social history, part diagnosis, part cultural critique, and part family manifesto. So I want it to spark conversations And I want those conversations to go so far that in 5 years, when the NAACP, who I believe is meeting right now with their national convention, when the NAACP, the National Urban League, the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Action Network, when they have their national conference, I want this book to have made such an impact that they are forced to do sessions and panels and workshops and discussions on the state of the black family and how the black leadership class can begin to sow seeds of more marriage and stronger family.
Yeah. You raise a good point there, talking about the progressive or left of center organizations that want equality in all spaces except the family. And your subtitle reveals two instances of welfare, economic equality, and feminism, that gender equality. So how do those two issues specifically play into the breakdown that we're seeing of the black family?
Yeah, so what I do in the book, I start with the legacy and impact of chattel slavery on the development of the black family, because I believed it was important to be honest in terms of my assessment, and acknowledging that the institution of slavery and the institution of marriage are two fundamentally incompatible institutions. As husbands, we understand that marriage comes with expectations, duties, obligations. The expectation that husband and wife are going to live together, that the husband would provide and protect his wife and children, the expectation of sexual exclusivity and monogamy, and none of those things can be guaranteed when you are owned by a third party. But my conclusion there is based on data and anecdotal accounts that enslaved men and women still valued marriage, and when emancipation came, one of the first things that they did was try to put their families back together. So at the end of the day, I say the lasting legacy of that institution on the black family is one, in terms of the black family's response to it, was a story of resistance and survival. Then I moved to the 1960s. And when you get to the 60s, you have two internal threats. So I characterize slavery as an external threat to the family. I characterize the rise of the welfare state expansion. So this is the rise of big government liberalism and the rise of second wave feminism at exactly the same time in the mid-1960s as two cultural shocks that disrupted the roles that men and women played inside of the home and how they interacted with one another. So I say that welfare expansion displaced men from their rightful role as providers in their home, and second wave feminism deceived women into believing that masculinity is toxic in men, but empowering in women. That femininity itself.
Whoa, wait a minute, man. Wait. You ain't gonna just skip over that piece. So women said it's toxic. Masculinity is toxic in men, but what in women?
But empowering in women.
Empowering in women. That's I like that. Okay. All right, go ahead.
So I actually left off one in the beginning, which is they deceive women into believing that femininity was weak, that masculinity was toxic in men and empowering in women, that marriage is oppressive, that the home is a prison, and that children are a burden. And by the time you get to the early 1970s, you have you have the rise of second wave feminism, you have the sexual revolution, you have the pill, you have no-fault divorce. So you have several things that, again, disrupted the social norms between men and women as it related to dating, mating, relationships, family, and children. So what happened over the course of the next generation is that those two things, and they weren't exclusive, they didn't have an exclusive impact on the black family, on the black community, but it started there because you had families that had disproportionate rates of poverty, and poverty itself became both racialized and feminized in the 1960s. Fighting poverty was seen as a key plank in sort of the women's liberation movement because the women were the ones obviously taking care of the children. So by the time you get to 1986, one generation removed from Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, you go from a 23% non-marital birth rate in 1965 to 62%, basically 20 years later in one generation. And we've been at or around 70% particularly in the black community, since the late 90s. So what happened is that those two things disrupted the dynamics between men and women, and those two factors were the two most important factors, at least in my analysis, of creating a new culture of family formation. And then, as any good Christian would understand, that everything reproduces after its own kind. So that new culture began to reproduce, even as the two initial elements began to withdraw, certainly by the time you get to welfare reform in 1996. So now you have some communities, some neighborhoods where you're going on the third generation of children who are being born to single, unmarried moms and raised without a father.
And so it's not only gone unchecked, but it's actually gained momentum over time.
Correct.
You know, Delano, the last time you were on, and I have to say, Mike, that he might have just broke the record for
He's back on top of the leaderboard.
Right. Like, I think this is your
That's what I like to hear.
14th time.
We've only done like 15 episodes.
This is his third time on the narrative, and I love it. And so I think the last time you were on, we were talking about how we were running the success sequence legislation here. Have one of the strongest success sequence bills in the nation, where we mandate you can't graduate until you learn about this framework for poverty avoidance in the state of Ohio, and which is a major win. But during the hearing process, where you think this would be something very empowering, very encouraging, when we talk about, how marriage, you graduate high school, work a full-time job in your 20s, and get married before you have, 97% kids avoid poverty. 30-some years later, 95% of Black and brown kids avoid poverty. They go through all three stages. When you look at married couples who are in poverty, I mean, you're looking at single digits, and that's been the case for 30-some years. We always talk about all the disparities, economic disparities, but man, for Blacks who are married, we're doing pretty good. I think the poverty rate for Black families is like 8%, 5% for white families. Why, you mentioned in the beginning that this is sometimes an issue with the NAACPs, the urban leagues, the Congressional Black Caucus. Why do they not see the benefit of this and the empowerment that is gained from marriage?
I believe they see it in their personal lives. They just don't tie it to policy prescriptions or social outcomes. I would say part of this is because when we had the first Black president who would regularly talk about the connection between family structure and social outcomes, the people who would smack him on the wrist and tell him to stop doing that were always Black Democrats on his progressive left. And I think the party itself has learned a lesson and say, look, we're not interested in talking about marriage unless we're talking about, so-called marriage equality or interracial marriage, which is only ever brought up in order to promote so-called marriage equality. So I think the left's aversion to the M word, if I could say it that way, is something that they learned over the last, call it 10 years. But I think there's a bigger issue at play, a more important structural issue. And it's that I'd say for at least the last two generations, the Black leadership class, and in Chapter 4, I talk about the failures of Black leaders to address this issue, and I characterize them as the Afrostocracy. These are the progressive Black politicians, pundits, preachers, professors, and performers. So this is the leadership class. For the better part of 40 plus years, and some may say longer, they have characterized every problem facing the Black community as the result of one of two things: an inequitable distribution of resources and systemic racism. And that leads to one of two solutions: bigger government and better white people. So
that's your next book, man, just for me. All right, we need better white people, starting first and foremost with Mike Andrews.
I'm right here, man. I'm right here.
So I say that somewhat in jest, but it's serious because if you think of how they address every issue, even the racial disparities they talk about, if it's the achievement gap in schools, it's always we need to spend more money on schools. If it's health outcomes, housing, employment, it's either this system is discriminating or this system is not providing enough resources in order to give the outcomes we want. And marriage and family formation is one area where they can't run that play. So I think they don't have a particular interest in doing that. So again, part of what I want to do is to challenge them to do that, to use their language to say, no, this is why we should be emphasizing these particular issues. And Dave, you talked about the importance of policy and legislation. I actually took the text of a marriage and family commission, of a bill that created a marriage and family commission in Texas. And I added a few things and took out a few things and massaged the language a little bit and sent it to the D.C. City Council as a commission on racial equity and family structure. Because I work in a very blue city, and they respond to arguments about racial equity. D.C. actually has an office on racial equity. And what I said in the sort of overview on the first page is that in D.C., the nation's capital, what used to be called Chocolate City, 77% of black children, all black children, not low income, not in one particular neighborhood, 77% of black children are born to unmarried parents, compared to 93% of white children who are born to married parents. That is a 70 percentage point gap, far greater than any other gap that the Office on Racial Equity has to deal with. So part of it is challenging them to apply the framework that they are most comfortable using to one of the, the most important social issue facing many of these communities.
And I love how you call that the ignored disparity, right? And, you know, we love to talk about disparities. You know, when you've got a 70% gap there, what is it like? And this is a question that I ask all the time. I asked it of one of your mentors, Bob Woodson, you know, a friend of mine. What is the aversion? Is it something systemic that we're seeing? That is there some kind of, group that doesn't want to see, black people thrive in America, and so because of that, then you can have all forms of families are equal. And or if not better than the nuclear family. What is it about the nuclear family? Is it that it's biblical as well as scientifically proven? Like, what is it?
So a couple things, and I'm glad you mentioned Bob, because I think about him, and I put him in the acknowledgement section of the book because I learned so much about his approach to addressing issues and really looking at leadership coming from the communities in which, he and the Woodson Center are focused, and I'm trying to do something similar in other cities across the country. I think there's a few things at play. One, and I remember this, one of the few things I remember from my engineering classes as an undergrad is that, and specifically this principle in physics, which is that an object at rest tends to stay at rest. I think there's been a great deal of cultural inertia around this issue, generally speaking, but particularly in the black community, where the longer you go without addressing an issue, the easier it is to ignore. I also do believe that there are some institutions and groups that have a vested interest in keeping the status quo. So in chapter 7 of the book, I talk about anticipating and removing political obstacles, and I name 6 groups that I predict will get in the way of family revival. I name them. I tell readers what they're going to say, so readers know, and then I tell readers how to respond. So these are the 6 groups. And in doing this, I'm going to tie in something that you mentioned, David, which is the success sequence bill in Ohio. You have your feminists, which is obvious. They're going to say an emphasis on marriage is about rolling back women's rights. We see this. Conservatives get hit with this all the time. You have abortionists who understand that 88% of women who seek abortions are unmarried. Now you all got this when you advanced your success sequence bill. Who was one of the biggest opponents of the bill? Planned Parenthood. Because Planned Parenthood does not want to see stronger families because it would impact their bottom line. So you have feminists, abortionists, you have LGBT activists who will say that a biblical definition of marriage is insufficiently inclusive for all the different ways in which couples pair up today. And that's pairing up today. At some point in the near future, 3 guys in New York City or San Francisco are going to walk into a courthouse and say, we demand to be married, and no one on the left will be able to tell them, well, our definition of marriage only holds to 2 adults and no more. So you have feminists, abortionists, LGBT activists, you have anti-racists. These are the Ibram Kendi types who say the issue is not family structure, it's just addressing removing white supremacy. If you destroy white supremacy, then all the other issues will fix themselves. You have functional atheists. These are some of the professing Christians, some people I know, some people I went to college with, who practice the values I write about in the book. They just refuse to promote them publicly. Part of the reason is that they don't want to shame people. They don't want to feel like they're talking down to or blaming single mothers. They don't like the idea of stigma. They don't like the idea of they practice certain ideals and they teach them to their children. They're just not willing to advocate for them in the public square because they understand that whenever you uphold something as an ideal, you imply that anyone who does not reach that standard is doing something that's less than ideal, and they just don't like feeling that. And then the last group are paternalists. These are big government liberals. So these are the people who say, well, the issue is not family structure, it's just we don't spend enough money to keep the recreation centers open 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these groups have some vested interest in maintaining the status quo. But I do think a big part of it is that if we're talking about the Black family and we're talking about rates of non-marital birth in single-family homes, then a lot of people feel like we're talking specifically about, we're criticizing Black women. And the party that says that Black women are its backbone and its savior are not going to be willing to say things that they feel are unduly and unfairly critical of Black women. And anyone who reads the book knows that I'm not critical of single moms in the book. Most of my fire and ire is saved for the leadership class, right? The people who don't speak up when they should. Is saved for the church, the impastors who distort biblical truth for political power. So I spent an entire chapter on liberation theology and how progressive pastors will distort God's word for the appearance of political power and social justice. So I think some of these fears are unfounded. And if I could be quite frank with you, especially now that the book is out, I've heard several people, including some believers that I know, say, well, you're from the Heritage Foundation. And because of Project 2025, we don't believe that you have our community's best interests in mind. Now, some people will just say, so I don't want to hear anything you have to say. And other people have found a way to push through and say, well, I'm reading the book and I'm interacting with you because I know you personally and I know your heart for the issue. So there are a lot of barriers to moving forward and progress. But I have faith that in the end, God's will is going to be done in this area.
You know, I think you've been very, very kind. I think if Bob Woodson was here, he would say they are poverty pimping. They have commoditized poverty. And since the 50s and 60s, he has seen the leadership, what did you call them? The
aristocracy.
The Afrostock. He said, I've seen them. I've watched them, he said, commoditize this thing and, drive narratives that we all know are false. I just came from a family reunion. We pushed this was our 95th family reunion.
95th birthday?
Wow.
Is that what it was?
See,
you look great for 95.
We need better white people, Mike. And so I went, we got there a little late, but there was some pictures standing up and they just elected me president of my family reunion, Mike. And so you call me Mr. President now. But,
I think that's going to happen.
The beautiful thing of looking at those pictures is that it wasn't just Uncle Harry. It was Uncle Harry and Aunt Betty.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Uncle Joe. It was Uncle Joe and Zenobia. It was on and on and on. It was the husband and the wife. It was the land that they purchased in their 30s and 40s and 50s and worked hard and farmed together and raised these families together. Family is such an integral part and always has been. It's one thing I love about your writing. But to get to the point now where our leaders are downplaying that powerful institution, that biblical institution, even if we don't want to talk about the social science, for financial gain cannot be skimmed over. That's got to be addressed, because that, to me, that is criminal.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and I went to my wife's family reunion in Baton Rouge a few years ago, and they had one every year for 50 years since the 1970s. But what you said just now about the 95th family reunion is powerful, and this is a broader commentary in terms of the family policy space and family culture. As family continues to disintegrate, there will be an entire generation of kids whose understandings of the family name, first and foremost, the idea that there's certain things you don't do in this household because we don't want to bring shame on the family name, right? We're the Williams family. The Smith family may behave that way.
That's right.
But the Williams family doesn't do that. So their understandings of the family name, the family car, the family home, the family traditions, family vacation, and to your point, David, even a family reunion are going to be extremely different, just because their understanding of family is going to be different. So that was a powerful, example. And I'll say this to your credit, one of the things that you see often in many families across any sort of ethnic group is that when the elder generation passes away, things oftentimes tend to fall apart. So to be able to hand the baton to you and say, and to trust you to now be the president of this enterprise and this institution, says a lot about your character and how much they trust you, to fulfill those duties. But yes, to your question or to your point about the political class, they have to be held to account. And I'm mindful that they often say that silence is violence, right? Or silence is complicity. Mm-hmm. But they are completely silent on these issues. Again, in the public sphere. Now, when they summer on Martha's Vineyard, or the Hamptons, or Napa Valley, or wherever they go, they do not promote baby mama, baby daddy culture where they go in their families.
That's for everybody else.
They just run cover for it and defend it in the public square. So to paraphrase or to quote Brian Wilcox, they talk right, they live right, but they talk left. And I do think that they have to be called to account. And the reason that I focus on them is not for some personal beef. It's because I acknowledge that while Black conservatives have been banging on this drum for quite some time, 97% of the institutional heft and might in the Black community sits on the center left of the political spectrum. So if something has to move, they have to be the people to move it eventually, right? Now, I think the remedy for that is for Black conservatives to either you can infiltrate and influence or create new institutions that promote a different set of values, the values that previous generations adhere to. But until that's the case, it will have to be some of these organizations that are forced to move. And that's why I say, the moral capital, spiritual, social, cultural, and financial capital of the Black community has to be allocated in a different way than it has been. Because to this point, the allocation strategy is all about politics. Even the preachers talk more about voting rights than they do marriage rights, RITES. And that's part of it that has to change.
Delano, it's always so great talking to you and interacting with with your thoughts and the way that you speak on these issues is so powerful. As we start to wrap up here, I do just want to ask, because we're seeing the scope of this problem, and because you've outlined it and really just scratched the surface of it, it may be a while before policy catches up, the needed policy changes happen. So are there any practical steps in our communities, in our churches, like really on the ground in the neighborhood type solutions that could start to bring about the change that we need to see in Black families?
Yes. So I'll do this. I'll go from the individual household and I'll work my way out. I think individually, and again, this is general commentary that I think every listener would benefit from, but families need to be intentional about the relationships that they have with other families and building those relationships on a set of shared values. Now, I'm not saying that I think that hard arranged marriages like they do in the East are going to pop up in America. But what I do think is that as families begin to, again, build some of those relationships, you'll see parents start to either whisper or say to other families, look, I've got a son, you've got a daughter, we share certain values and certain principles, biblical foundation. Let's just keep the door open, and in 15, 20 years, we'll come back and revisit that. Now, it may not be the family that you're closest with, because your children may see the other kids as, as play cousins, but it will be the family that's close to them that you share in common. So when the middle family has its, yearly cookout and the two other families come, I think you'll start to see some people beginning to say, look, I want my children to choose a mate from among these families that we know and respect. So I think, again, that's super practical. I also think parents should be intentional, not just about modeling good behavior when it comes to marriage and family, which is good, because in life oftentimes more is caught than is taught, but also saying it. Because a lot of our kids, especially if they go to public schools, and obviously the more time they spend outside of their parents' supervision and influence, are getting very different messages from the world. The world is not a bashful evangelist when it comes to family deconstruction. So I think part of it is maintaining the territory that we have influence over right now. When it comes to churches, that may look like churches either amplifying, growing, or creating marriage ministries or opportunities for couples to get together and do life together. It could be an informal, one member hosts, 10 couples on a Saturday afternoon and they just talk and play games, or it can be a more formal marriage ministry. I think what I hope to see is healthy marriage initiatives or community marriage initiatives begin to pop up in cities like, again, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, Memphis, St. Louis, Cleveland, Detroit, Atlanta, New Orleans, because there needs to be sort of a resource allocation and just focused resources put towards these issues. And that may mean a coalition of pastors that gets it started. And then I also think that things, again, on a city, local, and state level, everything doesn't have to be putting something into the curriculum. It could be a social service agency says, we're going to take a portion of our budget, right, and we're going to put it towards pro-marriage messaging in our community. In this town, we put marriage before carriage, whatever it is, right? So I think there are many things that institutions can do, and then depending on where they are, I think HBCUs play a tremendous role or can play a tremendous role in moving this ball forward. I've actually created a proposal for a marriage and family consortium, an HBCU marriage and family consortium, that would do original research on some of these issues. I'm just waiting for an HBCU. I've sent it to 2 now. I'm looking for someone to take it on and say, we want to own this, we want to create this, and we want to pull in partners who, one, are willing to define marriage biblically, right? Which means that there are a few universities that probably would not join this. I can think of them. I'm not going to put them out there. And we want to do new and original research. That could be at least two surveys every year, one to incoming students, asking questions like, would you be open to finding your spouse on campus over the next 4 years? And another to alumni, particularly parents, would you be open to your child getting married in the next 4 years? Right? Because a lot of what we're encountering is not just the acculturation of young people through social media, but it's also the types of messages they get from their parents. Even parents who get married young might tell their children, particularly their girls, focus on your studies, get your job, get your advanced degrees. A man will always be there ready and willing whenever you're done with that. And that's one of the reasons I think you see the age of first marriage go from 24 and 22 for men and women respectively in 1980 to about 31 and 29 with no sign that we're going to bend that curve back. So I think there's things that can be done on an individual level as well as on an institutional level, both inside and outside of the church.
Well, great stuff as always, Delano. The book is The Vanishing Black Family. Tell our listeners where they can pick it up and where they can follow you.
Well, they can definitely pick it up on Amazon. I hope that you see it in your local bookstore. So if any listener find the book, see it on the shelf on the bookstore, please take a picture, tag me at Delano Squires, DelaноSquires, on all platforms, particularly active on X and on Instagram. So I love to see when people either tag me when they've received the book or if they see it in a store or in a bookstore. So yeah, that's where you can get it, and that's where you can follow me.
Yeah, I had to ask Mr. Amazon to bring mine tonight about 10 o'clock because thought the homie would have signed one for me and sent it to me, but
he left you hanging.
Mr. Amazon hooked me up. So
next time I see you, I'll sign it for you and make sure
I'll sign a book for you, David. You want that?
Yeah. Y'all take care, y'all.
Well, Delano, truly, it's always our pleasure when we get to talk to you. It's been a joy.
Likewise,
and,
guys.
Good luck with the book. We look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.